let's go get some more questions from social media. Lily, what's going on over there?
This one asks, what is the domain of y equals log x?
All right, I'll take that one. So I'm going to write this down on my screen real quick. One thing that you need to remember is the first way to think about this is when we're talking about domain, we're talking about all the values of x that can be within this function. So one of the things I would do first is rewrite this to see this as an exponential function. So one thing to keep in mind when we talk about logarithms, if there is no base shown, the reason why we don't show a base is because this is called a common logarithm, and the base is always going to be 10. So I'm going to go ahead and rewrite that as log base 10 of x. And if you remember from a little bit earlier in the show, Becca rewrote an exponent into logarithm form. Now I'm going to do the opposite, and all I'm going to do is rewrite this as 10 to the power of y equals x.
So it's just rearranging.
Yeah, we're just rearranging this. It means the same thing, just in a different form, really.
Logarithms are exponents. They're
Right.
just exponents that are written in a different order.
Exactly. So one way to think about this now is like, what are all the possible values of x? Now, it doesn't matter if we kind of think about some examples, like if I were to raise 10 to the power of 10, I would get a positive number, and it'd be a really big number, but it would be positive. If I raise 10 to the power of 2, it would be positive. And even if I raise 10 to the power of a negative number, like -1, if you remember your exponent properties, this would still be a positive 1 over 10. So no matter what number you plug in here, even if I do 10 to the power of 0, and we talked about this earlier with that same problem, we would get a positive 1. So you notice for my domain...
Fractions, too.
What's that?
Fractions,
Oh, right, yeah.
to test them as well.
Oh, right, you can plug in a fraction, so like 10 to the power of 1/2
Yes.
would also be positive.
Just to
because it'd
cover
be-
so that you're testing every type of number, every
Right.
type of possibility. We could get fractions, we could get negative numbers, we could
So-
test 0, and
If I threw a 1/2 in there, if you remember, and that looks kind of weird, I just kind of jammed it in there. So 10 to the power of 1/2, you could think of this, one way to think about it is this is the square root of 10, which is also a positive number. So no matter what value of y you plug in there, you're always going to get positive numbers. So in this case, the domain is all positive numbers. And one thing I almost forgot to mention, there is no exponent you could plug in for y here. Oh, that's supposed to be a highlighter. That would make x here 0. So your domain is x has to be greater than 0, not equal to it. And you can also see this graphically. I went ahead and pulled up a quick graph of this function. And you can see this graphically as an asymptote forms here. And you notice in this graph, x gets very close to 0. And it's hard to tell here, but if you were to really like zoom very, very far in, you would see it gets very, very close to 0, but will never actually touch 0. So again, domain is greater, x is greater than 0.
it's a tough concept to teach, domain
Yeah.
and range. Because we're just saying, well, it's all the possible things it could be. And you're like, well,
Seems like it could be a lot.
it
Yeah.
seems like it could. The testing numbers is a really good strategy to help
Right.
you find domain testing to see
And
like,
if you ever
well,
forget,
what kinds of things could it be? And then also looking at the graph is another way to visually figure out what domain is.
yeah, and I often remember, I know a lot of students I had before always struggled with the idea of domain, especially with rational functions. And I usually try to think about what it can't be.
Right.
in
Is there
terms of
anything
writing a
I can think
rule.
of that it can't be?
Right.
Exceptions to the rule. That's very true.
Subscribe!
Come on, push the button.
You know
Yeah, you want to.
Do it.